but to Washington. The change has always been built on our willingness, we, the people, to take on the mantle of citizenship. You are American.
That was President Obama earlier today. My next guest, the son of a civil rights lawyer who played a huge role in the writing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Following in his father's footsteps, pursuing a career in public policy, Congressman Bill Foster of Illinois' 11th District joins me now on the phone tonight. Congressman, I know you're at an event, so thank you very much for taking time out to chat with me.
Oh, happy to be here.
Well, today's commemoration, obviously special meaning for you because of the work your dad did. A lot of people may not know about that. Let's get it on the table. What role did your dad play regarding the Civil Rights Act of '64?
Well, my father was a civil rights lawyer, and what he did was write much of the enforcement language behind the Civil Rights Act of 1964. These were the detailed federal regulations that said what the southern school districts had to do year by year to integrate their school systems. Because, as you remember, one of the big issues was the segregated school systems.
Right.
And in 1954, they had the famous Supreme Court case, Brown versus Board of Education, which declared that separate school systems were inherently unequal and unconstitutional. But then in the decade between 1954, when the Brown versus Board of Education was declared, and in 1964, when the Civil Rights Act passed, you had only the federal courts to go after the southern school system. So my father spent much of that decade sort of as an advance man for the U.S. Justice Department. He would go around and visit all the southern school districts that were struggling with integration, and then he would send memos back to the Justice Department saying that in this county there's one guy that runs the county and he understands the tide of history, and if you can just have Robert Kennedy or whoever was running the Justice Department Civil Rights Division, if you can have him make a phone call and flip him, everything will be fine. But in another district, it's a lost cause. Just bring in the troops and file suit.
Yeah, it's just. And, Congressman, today, I mean, that's 50 years ago. And so, people look back and hard to imagine those days even existing. But did your dad ever talk to you at home about what working in that environment was like, or whether there was any challenges for him, to be honest, as a white lawyer working on civil rights provisions that were so strongly opposed in many of those southern states?
Yeah, my father had grown up in the South. He was actually, like me, he was a scientist. He got a chemistry degree from Stanford. And because of his experiences in World War II, came back and decided that he wanted to spend most of his life in service to his fellow man, and saw civil rights as the human rights challenge of his generation. And because he'd grown up in the South, he could turn on the Southern accent and get everyone to calm down. He wasn't just another Northern lawyer coming in to raise trouble in the South.
Somebody that I'm sure that he sounded charming to those folks then.
That's right. So when they needed someone to speak on television at the 5:30 news, they would rustle up my dad, who'd turn on the Southern accent and explain that, integrating your school systems was something that would be required, but it wouldn't be the end of the universe.
And of course, Congressman, we look back at those days to try and learn something today. Just leading into our interview, you may have heard President Obama make the comment that change doesn't come from Washington, but it comes to Washington. Well, you're following in your dad's footsteps, trying to make a difference. You're in Congress now. So let me get your reaction to President Obama's comments. The change doesn't come from Washington, it comes to it.
There are times when it goes both directions. Washington usually waits until the people have made their voice very clear. I remember my father used to talk about how he would go to conferences at Notre Dame and so on in the late 50s and early 60s, where people would draft versions of what became the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And the people would almost laugh at them. Yeah, I'm sure that you'll get this through the U.S. Congress because of the opposition from the Southern senators at the time. And so, and then there was 1963. There was all of the violence, the protests and everything. And the people of the United States stood up and spoke with one voice that this was overdue and it was time. And as a result, he said it was like turning on a switch. All of a sudden that, senators would be calling them up and say, hey, I want to propose something. What do you have that could be useful for dealing with a civil rights problem?
And Congressman, I know you were celebrating the event today in Aurora. So many speakers today talked about the economic disparity in our society. If you want to tie your what you were doing today with indeed an effort to try and improve the economic conditions of everybody.
Well, it was at Aurora University. And Aurora University, when I looked over the crowd of 500 students and some faculty, I looked out and it looked like the United States of America. And Aurora University is an example of an institution that is providing the change that is the only permanent change that will really solve the problem, which is education of everyone in this country.
All right, Congressman Bill Foster, thanks so much for spending some time with us today and sharing some history people may not have known about your background. I appreciate it, sir. You can go back to your event and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks so much.
All
Happy
right.
to do it.